Okay, so El Salvador. Let's talk about the recent news that came out that El Salvador is going to accept Bitcoin as a legal tender, right? I really wanted to look at this news from a few perspectives. One sounded like an amazingly big development in the entire blockchain economy that a country, even though not as big a country, but it's a pretty big step that a country now wants to accept Bitcoin as a legal tender, i.e., one of the official currencies of the country itself. So I really wanted to understand, what were the motivations behind this country actually doing it? What are the other players who are involved, the IMF, the World Bank, other countries, the sort of users? Why are they sort of willing to either go with it or not go with it? And what is really the ultimate gameplay that El Salvador has from everything that we can see so far? So, sort of, let's delve into it. This should be an interesting little conversation that we have. Okay, so El Salvador is, a fairly small country. It doesn't have a very large GDP. From what I could find, its GDP is close to around $10 billion. It has a very large global remittance, which means around 2 million Salvadorians who live outside of El Salvador actually send a lot of money back into El Salvador. The same happens a lot in a lot of countries, including India. The Philippines as well has the same scenario. But El Salvador receives around $4 billion, which is close to 23% of its annual GDP as these remittances, right? The other interesting aspect is El Salvador has the US dollar as its official currency so far. In 2001, it actually changed its currency to the US dollar. Before that, I think its currency was, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, called the colon, named after Christopher Columbus. And since 2001, so the last 20 years, it actually does not have its own currency, but it accepts the US dollar as its official tender, right? So one, this is important, very, very important to understand that as a country, its citizens, the entire administration, they are used to accept an outside currency as its own, right? So, they do agree that once they actually have the US dollar as its official currency, they don't really have any control on the US dollar, right? Like, unlike the US, which actually can print more dollars as and when they want, which is what, they have been doing over the last decade plus, particularly during the coronavirus time, also during the global financial crisis in 2008 to 2009, El Salvador does not have that option, right? All its debt, can be denominated in the US dollars. Its citizens get US dollars, but as a country, you don't control the currency. That currency is actually controlled by another country, which is US dollars. It definitely has the benefit that it does not need to, print that money. It doesn't need to really follow what is happening with its circulation. It makes trade easier with the US. The US is the larger partner of El Salvador, which was the other reason why they agreed to actually accept the US dollar as their currency in 2001 as well, right? But this really opens up the door that as a country, they are a lot more willing to accept an outside currency as a legal tender, right? So that actually presents, favorable conditions for the acceptance of Bitcoin into that market. The other, as I said, global remittances are 23% of their GDP, right? $4 billion, a pretty large number. One of the things that President Bukele said, that the market of Bitcoin is very large, and even if 1% of Bitcoin actually gets invested in El Salvador, that increases their GDP by more than 50%, which, yes, there is a case to be made, and was probably one of the things that actually was sold to the president, or was sold to the government, to the public, to actually accept Bitcoin as a legal tender, right? Now, what does it mean to have Bitcoin accepted as a legal tender in El Salvador, right? What it means is that every business, every economic agent, every shop, every travel agent, every bank will now have to accept Bitcoin as a form of payment, right? They cannot say, hey, we do not accept this currency, pretty much like everybody in India who is doing business can't really say that, listen, we don't accept the Indian rupee. They have to accept Indian rupee. That is our currency. Similarly, in the United States, they have to accept the US dollars as well. So now in El Salvador, they will have two official currencies, right? It'll be the US dollars as well as now Bitcoin, right? As a user, as a consumer, I'll obviously have a choice whether I pay in US dollars or I pay in Bitcoin, right? So from that aspect, from the consumer perspective, from the normal public's perspective, this feels like an additional option. From the business's perspective, it's definitely an interesting sort of cost that they would have to bear to be able to set up this entire system, right? Once this law has been passed in early June, they have another 90 days, so around in September, when this should actually pass through and become a legal tender into that country. Do they have the systems for all businesses to accept it? I unfortunately don't have enough data to make an educated guess on that. But I don't think it's as easy as it sounds to make sure that every business, every small business in particular, will have that technology to be able to accept Bitcoin. This was also one of the reasons why El Salvador actually asked the help of the World Bank to help them in this acceptance of Bitcoin as a legal tender, to which the World Bank refused, citing that actually Bitcoin still has a lot of concerns about its energy consumption for mining, and hence they are not really happy to, help El Salvador in making it a legal tender for them, right? The IMF also, though in principle they are not against this move, they did say that it raises legal issues, macro issues for El Salvador, and El Salvador is looking to raise $1 billion from the IMF currently as well. One could read in between the lines and say that, by El Salvador doing it, they probably would have had at least some discussion with the IMF, where by doing this, the IMF is not really ticked off and not taking that $1 billion deal off the table. So in some way, there is some sort of agreement in principle that by El Salvador doing this, it doesn't really change the relationship between the El Salvador as a country and IMF as well. So that's also a pretty important aspect, right? The other thing to really delve into is the fact that around 2 years ago in 2019, a project in El Salvador started which was called Bitcoin Beach, right? Now, this has been funded by an anonymous, I really couldn't find the name of this Bitcoin philanthropist, someone who has been involved in Bitcoin from the very beginning. He is the person who is apparently funding this initiative. The idea is to take two coastal villages of El Salvador. The banking penetration in Salvador is really, really low, right? I think some estimates are at 30%. Some actually said it's actually only 10% people who come under the banking sort of penetration and who have access to organized banking. Either way, the penetration is a really low number. And really the idea of this Bitcoin village was to make sure that the unbanked actually are able to access these financial services by coming and using Bitcoin, right? And this entire economy of Bitcoin village is really around Bitcoin as the only means of transaction. So it isn't that you accept Bitcoin converted into dollars. It's if I go to my barber, I pay my barber Bitcoin. The barber then, if he or she wants to buy bread or milk for the house, pays the same to the shopkeeper pays their vendor in Bitcoin, and so on and so forth. So pretty much it becomes a genuine alternative to the currency, which is what everybody wants Bitcoin to be eventually as well. So the Bitcoin village was obviously a small sort of a test and experiment in El Salvador, which is actually still continuing, and actually was probably also something which gave more impetus, more reason for El Salvador to even accept this deal. But by and large, considering everything that I have seen, this looks like a great PR information to bring El Salvador onto the map of everybody, right? The very fact that I went, studied it, I really understood about what is happening, the reason I'm making this video, hopefully some of you will like it, and really understand why El Salvador is doing it. I think this has actually really worked for them, which is putting El Salvador back on the map if they can actually ease these remittances as well, the $4 billion that they get from Salvadorians outside of their country, and actually make it, more frictionless via Bitcoin, that actually helps their case a lot, right? The amount of fees that are there in remittances to across foreign payments is very, very high. The amount of time it takes is very, very high. Definitely Bitcoin is something that can help on both ends. It can make the transactions much faster, hopefully much cheaper, if not now, then definitely over time. And even if you get a 25% increase in these remittances because of the acceptance of Bitcoin, that itself will be a pretty big boost for the El Salvador's economy, right? So I think one, it does a great PR benefit, puts El Salvador on the map. Two, if it increases global remittances, which are 23% of El Salvador's GDP, it is a big boost for the economy. Three, if it encourages more Bitcoin investors, more Bitcoins, people who really believe in that ecosystem to go to El Salvador and actually set something up. The other possibility that the president opened up is to say that they will use the volcanic energy to actually have a sustainable form of Bitcoin mining. That could be another sort of potential thing to boost as a Bitcoin ecosystem into that economy. That will be another sort of big positive for El Salvador. They will always be named as the first country who accepted Bitcoin, and if other countries actually eventually follow, they have their name on the leaderboard. It's a good legacy to be part of as well, right? But if I outweigh sort of the cost as a country to actually really make this into a legal tender and make it into an alternative of the US dollar, I think those stakes are much higher. The 90 days are actually not even a drop in the entire bucket to be able to take the entire economy, and particularly the small businesses, to get them up to speed to accept this as a legal tender, right? So, I'm not gonna wait with bated breath to see the adoption of Bitcoin. I think it's a good first step. I think, especially given the history of El Salvador accepting the US dollar, another outside currency, as their own legal tender, I think it makes sense for El Salvador to do it with the other sort of benefits that I talked about in global remittances, more Bitcoin investments coming in, and if there is a potential to actually start some sort of Bitcoin mining in El Salvador using sustainable energy from the volcanoes, this could be something really interesting for them as an economy and for the people of El Salvador. So I think it's a good move. Again, we shouldn't really look at this as real adoption, because I think that's going to take a lot longer than the 90 days, in my opinion, given how much penetration you would need to have of technology for people to really accept it, as an actual legal tender. But I think it's a good move. I would really want to see what other countries think of it, but I personally would not take this move as having a cascading effect for other countries to actually go for it. There is definitely an advantage to get your name as being first, because it has some sort of legacy attached to it, some sort of PR benefit attached to it, some sort of halo effect that maybe can emerge out of it. But given El Salvador's position in global remittances, the US dollar already being its official currency instead of their own currency since 2001, I think it makes sense for El Salvador to do it. But I wouldn't wait with bated breath for any large country to actually accept Bitcoin as its legal tender anytime soon. But this is a really interesting space. Let us know what you guys felt are the motivations behind El Salvador accepting Bitcoin as its legal tender and as its other official currency. Let's keep continuing these conversations. This space keeps getting more and more exciting. Take care and talk to you guys soon.